Hey, so today is going to be a fun one. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite movies of all time, Pixar's Inside Out. I've got some ideas about how to take the joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, those personified emotions from the movie, to take the versions of those that live in our heads and how to listen to those emotions, listen to those voices. We're going to use this feedback that we get from our emotions. We're going to use this information to construct a plan about where we go next. I think more than any episode so far, this one's really geared toward that sense of like not even knowing what you want, or just kind of being at a loss of what the next thing is, or like maybe if you don't know what you're passionate about, or you don't know like what your thing is. I think this is going to be a good episode for you. It's going to be fun talking about Pixar, talking about emotions. It's all right up my alley, kind of my sweet spot. Should be a fun one. Welcome to episode 11 of Me and the Quest. Well, hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode 11 of Me and the Quest. This is a podcast to help you do big, meaningful things in the world, make big, meaningful changes in your life. This is the second to last episode of season 1. Next week, episode 12 will wrap things up in a finale that I'm actually really excited about. I kind of have had my eye on that episode from day one, and I sort of think of it as the plot twist episode where, I think it's going to be kind of maybe a little bit of a plot twist, something that's not necessarily expected, but to me, it's the resolution and the really important moment that to me makes everything so far work. And so I'm really excited about next week's episode, episode 12 of season 1. And then we'll, be on a little break. I'm not exactly sure yet what season 2 is going to look like, but you can expect some interviews. You can expect some more solo episodes like this. I do think season 2 will span, from spring through the summer. And I also expect season 2 to not be as set on a schedule. It might be a bit more random. It might be, no episodes for a couple weeks, and then I drop like a little mini series of short episodes, and then I drop, a 90-minute interview with someone. Like it could be pretty sporadic, but I'm excited to kind of experiment. And I'm gonna have a lot going on through the summer. Baby on the way. Quite a bit of music gigs on the horizon, and a lot to kind of prep for with that. It's gonna be crazy. Summer always, we're always kind of managed to fill our summers up with fun stuff. And so I don't exactly know what the podcast is gonna look like, but I'll keep chipping away, keep making stuff because I enjoy this, and I think it's fun. One note on that, actually, because I'll be moving away in all likelihood from like a strict weekly episode, it's going to be really like helpful to make sure you are subscribed wherever you listen to this, YouTube or on your podcast app, and also follow the show on Instagram at Me and the Quest, because that's where you'll make sure that you do see when I'm posting episodes, because it won't be maybe as predictable in the summer. Okay. So to start off today's episode, I just wanted to kind of throw this out there. This idea of, I don't know what I want. And I've talked to people, that have listened to the show, and that is kind of where they feel like they're at. And so my response to that tends to be, do you really not know what you want? Is that really the case? And I'm just going to leave an awkward silence here. Like, note to self in the editing room here, like, don't chop out the awkward silence, because I want that to just kind of sit there. Like, do you really not know what you want? Or is what you want buried beneath fears, questions about how to actually do it, the logistics? Is it buried beneath, excuses or the opinions of other people? Do you really not know what you want? I think most of the time, if we're honest, there are things that we want deep down, and it could be what you want your personal life to look like, what you want your family life to look like, what kind of job you want to go to, where you want to live, what kind of friends you want to have, what kind of experiences you want to have, what you want, to be said about you at your funeral, right? Like most of us, if we can sit with that for a little bit and can be honest with ourselves, there are things that are actually pretty obvious that we do want. And we just kind of have learned to ignore them over time with okay, yeah, I do want this, but I can't. Like, I can't do that. My time is like, that's not going to happen. Or, I tried that and I failed. Or how, like, I want this, but how in the world could I ever make that happen? Right now, we're not worried about those buts, right? Just sit and think about, do you really not know what you want? Because, I just doubt that's true. I totally get that. Like, I don't think most of us have like a plan, like of absolutely every detail of our lives. And like, I think, if you have your whole life planned out, sort of to the day and to the smallest detail, like, that's not how life works, and things are going to change. So I'm not saying you should do that, but those big things that, you really, really want the most deep down, I just wanted to start the episode by saying, don't stay on the surface and sort of accept this idea that, like, I don't know what I want. And it might be that you don't know what you want for your career, but you do know what you want for your family, and that's fine. Like, I'm not saying you have to have it all figured out, but there are some things you want. Something in your personal life that you just know is the most important thing that you want to see happen. Something in your, internal world that you want to improve about how you feel about yourself, or how your mental health or your physical health, or maybe it's something in your career that you just have like this really clear dream job or something. Most of us have that one or two things, and as you think about this idea of the quest, like, that's enough. Like, that's enough to give your days some meaning. If you can have that one thing that's out in front of you, that you can wake up every day and put the work in to move closer to that one thing. The other things can kind of become secondary, and that's fine. So anyways, that's just where I wanted to start. And then now let's talk about this inside out idea of listening to our emotions. I'm just going to kind of tease where we're going to go here. So I got the first three are kind of related. We're going to talk about listening to joy, listening to sadness, and listening to anger. And then the last two are about things that might be holding us back from where we want to be. All right, so that's where we're headed. Let's do this thing. All right, let's start with this idea of listening to joy. I do think this one is actually a little bit tricky, because I think there's a lot of stuff online that's very shallow and sort of can be a slippery slope about, sort of do whatever makes you happy. There's a lot of the Instagrams and the TikTok and all the stuff about, there's a good looking model and she's like standing on a cliff looking over like this in a tent that somehow they got up on top of this amazing mountain, and the sun is setting and there's nice music playing, and it's like, just follow your dreams. You can do whatever you want. I don't know that is awful or wrong. But it's definitely not enough, and it's not what I mean by like listening to joy. I would love to travel and wake up on top of a mountain and like just have like this nice folk music playing, like, and I don't even know where it's coming from, like, as the sun rises, and I sip my coffee, and there's like a 360 camera that goes around me so I can post it on Instagram and get a bunch of views. That sounds fun, but like, that's not what I'm talking about. I want to talk about joy. So if you're not really sure what you want to do next, what you're passionate about, obviously one of the best places is to start with this idea of joy and thinking about when in the past you have been the most joyful, like the most excited about something, the most vibrant. I've been thinking lately about this idea of flow state, and actually the Pixar movie Soul, maybe the only movie I maybe like even more than Inside Out. I don't know. Like, they're both right up there. They talk about this in that movie, kind of getting in the zone, I think they call it. There's actually been some interesting like research done in the last few years about what they call flow state, and that sense of just being in the zone when you lose track of time and you're just doing that thing, something that you love. And again, this is not about this is not at all about if someone will pay you to do this thing. And for me, like I have been paid to make music, but most of the best like being in the zone moments are actually when I'm not getting paid to do it, and I'm not even necessarily working on a specific project. It's those times when it's it's late and I'm the only one up, and I'm just making music for its own sake and just messing around and writing and exploring ideas and just playing music for its own sake for no audience and with no agenda. And that's like when I'm most likely to get in that zone. But it's not just like a craft. Like you don't have to have a craft like a musical ability or anything like that. It can be like for me, I also like often get in that deep joyful place when I'm in nature and on a hike on the coast of Maine. That's like one of the best things for me. Like the other day, I went into a record store because I've gotten my record players fixed, and I'm getting kind of jumping back into collecting records and having a lot of fun. And it's a little bit like, I don't know if silly is not the right word. It's a light hobby. It's just kind of a fun thing for me. But like going into that record store, and they had, or an antique store with a really good record collection, like that was a joyful sort of losing sense of time. I could have been in there for hours. And maybe it seems so light and frivolous and like, okay, so you like to collect records. What does that tell you about like what you want to do with your whole life? There might be something there, right? And those little pockets, those little things that we just love more than anything else. I think we can piece these things together, these moments throughout our lives when we've been the most vibrant, when we lose sense of time because we just love what we're doing. Also, I think joy can also come down to like a deeper sense of purpose, that when you're doing something that might be hard or uncomfortable and not necessarily fun. It reminds me of this story I saw about a man who had like this really good corporate job and made a whole bunch of money and had climbed the ladder and was miserable. And at some point he had an opportunity to go to Calcutta and see Mother Teresa, and he basically ended up leaving everything and spent basically the rest of his life working in just about the hardest conditions you can imagine, right? Like extreme poverty, death all around. But in this interview I saw with him, like to call that happiness or like this light, like the Instagram thing of like I'm on a mountain and it's the sun setting and it's beautiful and I just sort of just bliss. It's not that, but I think you could call that joy, right? It's purpose. It's being a part of something bigger than yourself. And that's part of joy too, right? Joy is not strictly, I don't think, self-serving. And it's not just the pursuit of pleasure. It's the pursuit of purpose and doing something meaningful. So first thing we want to listen to is listen to joy. When have we been in those spaces doing those things that kind of fit that description that we just talked about? The next one I want to talk about is listening to anger. This is something that has actually become a really good guide for me. And I think Rob Bell, I think on his podcast is where I heard him talk about it. I don't know exactly. But I know that he kind of helps guide me in this practice of listening to anger. And there's actually two things that I kind of come back to when I find myself experiencing anger. And it's funny because like for me, I'm someone I don't think in my entire life ever been confronted about how angry I was, or like, why did you get so angry with me? Or like, I've never had those conversations because anger outbursts are not my personality at all. But of course, like everyone I do get angry. For me, it's often kind of ruminating on things like conversations or things I overheard or things I saw online that just, get under my skin, and you have those imaginary conversations with the person, right? And you're like, in these imaginary conversations, you just say everything right and kind of put them in their place. And it's just a waste of time and a waste of mental energy. But that's what anger looks like for me, right? Sort of that more of a stewing internal imaginary thing. So I kind of break it down into two categories of things that anger can show us. So one is it tends to show you your unhealthy attachments. Your if you get criticized a little bit and you have this huge outburst of anger, or you just stew on it for forever, right? Maybe there's probably like an unhealthy attachment to how people see you, to your reputation, to being perceived in a certain way. So anger is a really good one. If you kind of pay attention, anger is really good at showing you like, okay, why did I get angry at that? Like obviously there's something in me that is kind of tied up in this. And when they attacked that, it was an attack on me, right? So that's a good way to kind of listen to anger and figure that out. But really where I want to camp out more for this episode is the idea of listening to anger and sort of that righteous anger, and that listening to the things that make us angry can show us what we're passionate about. It's a good way to notice what lights us up when we look at things in the world and it riles us up and it makes us angry in that good way, in that good, I kind of want to fight for what's right. That can really point to maybe something we could invest some time and energy in doing. But here's this one trap I want to help us avoid that I've personally stepped in a whole bunch of times, and I'm sure I will continue to, but this was helpful for me, so I'm share it with you. Thinking about these two types of anger, right? You've got the good righteous anger, and you've got this version of anger that is really about us being attached to things, and it's silly and it's pointless, and it's not, that anger doesn't really help us with anything, right? I'm gonna take something like politics. Is such a this is something where I saw this in myself so much, where to me I said, and I would say, that it's about this righteous anger. It's about that this isn't right and it should be this way, and it makes me so angry that it's not this way. There is definitely truth in that, but a lot of the times it was actually more about my attachment and my like identity, right? And so it's like, I identify as someone who cares about this. So when you don't agree or you attack this idea, I have an unhealthy attachment and sort of this tangled up thing where like, well, that idea is part of me. So when you attack that idea, you're attacking me. And especially when you get into like people that are in your life that you like kind of want to have some sort of relationship with, and if they don't get it, then you feel like kind of unseen, and that makes you angry. Blah 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 blah. I say that because as we talk about in this episode, the idea is like listening to these emotions and using that to navigate like what we want in life, help us figure out like what's next, what is the next thing we want to do. Let's not waste time pretending that it's righteous anger when really it's about that like, oh, I just want so and so to like get me, but they don't. I bring all that up because I want us to be aware that I think it's really common for anger and this thing to disguise itself as righteous anger, and that we're fighting for what, the good in the world, and we're standing up for something, when so often it's really just about our identity, and it's about us wanting to be right, and it's about us wanting to be seen. And that's all valid, and I understand that human need. But as we navigate anger and try to use that to help us figure out what it is maybe that we're passionate about, let's be careful let's untangle all that. And then those things that we're still angry about, those things that we feel so strongly about, those things that evoke like a physical response, right? There might be something there about the things that make us angry in that good way, can often point us to something that we're passionate about. And from there, might be something that kind of helps us get out of bed, and it's a project we can work on to help make the world better. It's even just the way we, conduct our friendships and stuff, if we're kind of helping fight back that injustice. It can even be something like if unhealthy families and families falling apart make you angry, and like, this is just wrong that this keeps happening, and it's sad, and I want to be part of the solution. Then waking up and being a good partner, being a good parent, that has now a bigger narrative structure to it, where it's not just about you and your family. It's about that you're kind of fighting back against this unfortunate thing in the world. So for many of us, anger is something that makes us really uncomfortable, and it's not something we really want to admit to, or like that we even have, or we definitely don't want to explore and sort of hang out with. But I think there's a ton that we can learn from listening to anger. And finally, let's talk about listening to sadness. Again, I think these uncomfortable feelings like sadness and anger, we tend to think of them as bad feelings. I love how they handle this in Inside Out. I love how Mr. Rogers talks about it. I think it's so important, this idea that there aren't bad emotions. There are uncomfortable emotions. But I think Mr. Rogers, he says something about basically like if it's once you can name it, you can manage it. Something along those lines. But it's sort of like if we don't explore the sadness, if we don't explore the anger, only the bad side of that, only the bad consequences of those emotions come out. But if we can mine it, we can actually learn from it. We can use that information, those good things that sadness and good things that anger teach us, to make us better, more whole, healthy people. So even though sadness is obviously uncomfortable and not something we tend to like to sit in, some good questions, right? So things like, what do you miss the most in your life right now? Something you used to have or used to be true of you that isn't true of you right now. What's something you miss the most? What's something that would make you really sad if you never got to have or experience? And maybe that's something you'll never get to have again, or something that you've never had before, and you're worried that you'll never have it or never experience it. Right? That's kind of uncomfortable. That's not fun to sit in. But gosh, if you can just acknowledge that to yourself and get that really crystallized and clear, now you have something to go on a quest toward. Now you have something to get you out of bed and help you, give you some direction about like what's most important. So now you have something to go on a quest toward. Now you have something, when we don't explore the sadness, we just cope, we just medicate it. And it goes unhelped, unanswered, and we just get more miserable and more numb and more bored. When you can acknowledge like that thing that you're sad about, next time you go to just cope, or you go to just kind of distract yourself, now you can think like, do I want to be the kind of person who just is always sad and just kind of goes back to the coping mechanisms, or do I want to be the person who does something about that sadness, who takes some action, who does some hard things, who puts in the work? So listen to joy, listen to anger, listen to sadness. Hopefully something in those three was helpful for you. And then to wrap things up, I want to talk about these two different things to think about, these things that might be holding you back from where you want to get to. So first is this idea, kind of continuing on this theme of sadness. Could it be true that an unwillingness to go through sadness to get to joy is holding you back? Could it be true that you are unwilling to go through the sadness you need to go through to get to the joy that sort of awaits on the other side? So you're stuck, so you're bored, so you're sad, ironically, right? Because we're not willing to fully go into that sadness to get to the joy that's on the other side. One way I see this is actually, I think there's like an inherent sadness in choice. When we make a choice, when we pursue a path, all the other paths die out, they disappear. And so even the best things in my life, the things that bring me the most joy, the things that I'm most proud of, and the things that I love most in my life, there's still like a choice involved there. And when you make that choice, the other things that could have been fall away. Those are no longer options for what might be true of your life. And even when the thing that you do choose is great and you love it and it brings you joy in it and it's where you're meant to be, there's a sadness in the death of all those other things that could have been. And so I think it's definitely been the case for me. It's really easy to not make a choice because of that sadness involved in making a choice. But of course, something I will keep coming back to on the show, right? That indecision is a decision, right? That lack of choice is a choice. So we might as well choose the thing and like make the conscious decision and choose the thing that that means the most to us, and let the other things die out and experience that sadness of, if I live here, I can't also live here. If I marry this person, I can't also be single and travel the world, or I can't also be single and who knows who else I might meet. Like, if I take this opportunity, these other possibilities that might have come up might go away. There's a sadness in choice. But we have to go through that to get to the joy that's on the other side. And I think there's other versions of this too, right? Where maybe you've been through some heavy stuff and you won't go through the sadness of healing to get to the healthy, joyous place on the other side. So I just encourage you. I know it's hard, and I totally get it, and I'm not trying to be insensitive, but like, do what you got to do to take care of that sadness, so you can get to that joy on the other side. We can't let an unwillingness to experience some sadness keep us from a joyful, meaningful, vibrant life. My last point, and this is another thing that might be holding us back, and these are the two other emotions that we haven't talked about yet: fear and disgust. Fear and disgust have a lot in common, actually. Especially, and I really like, it was helpful for me the way that they explain them in Inside Out. Where fear, that character he tends to care a lot about actual self-preservation, staying alive, having food to eat, having shelter, not dying, right? There's actually a line in Inside Out, like, we didn't die today. I count that as a unmitigated success. I think he says that we didn't die today. That's fear. That's self-preservation. And disgust actually cares a lot about the social element of fear of being outcast, fear of being seen as disgusting, essentially. That social survival instinct that we are, we're pack animals, essentially, and we don't want to do something to get us kicked out of the pack, because then we'll die. So knowing that, you've got fear and you've got disgust, I think it's worth exploring what you tend to gravitate more toward as an excuse. The strict self-preservation, how am I going to pay for that? What if I do this thing and I lose a bunch of money? Like, if I take that job, I won't have health insurance. If, I can't do this right now because I've got too much debt, and those are all like valid. I don't even mean excuse as a bad thing. We should definitely be thinking about all those things. Fear of self-preservation and staying alive and taking care of ourselves needs to be some part of the equation. Do you tend to go toward that, or do you tend to go toward the social aspect of what are people going to think? Am I going to be misunderstood and sort of written off and outcast? Am I going to be made fun of? Am I going to be... I was going to say, am I going to be alone? I actually think that's more of the self-preservation. That's more of the fear. Like, am I going to be left all alone if I do this thing? So for me, I tend toward the social side a lot more. Like, if I have fears about something, it's a lot more about, what are people going to think? Will I be misunderstood? I don't like the feeling of people not liking something I did or not liking me. Am I gonna experience that? But Erin is actually much better and much more naturally tends toward that self-preservation side of things. Like, if she wakes up in the middle of the night, it's going to be like, oh, did I pay that bill? I forgot to pay that bill. Things like that. Oh no, that bill's going to come out. We're not going to have money for groceries. Things like that. That makes it sound like we're so broke. It's not. It's along those lines, right? Like, don't worry about us. We're fine. But that's where her kind of gut is going to tend to go. And I'm going to tend to go toward like, oh, like I was at that party and I said that thing and that person made that face. Like, were they thinking that, like, wow, that guy's weird? Like, I'm going to tend to think about those social things. And so one is not better than the other. And I actually think, like, in a relationship, it's helpful to know that about each other, and to use that as a strength in a way that we complement each other, rather than it could definitely be a minefield for misunderstanding each other and thinking the other person doesn't care. So it's actually super helpful, a little relationship tip for you there. Think about self-preservation versus like that social instinct. But once you have figured out like kind of what your tendency is, and we all have versions of, like, I do, of course, worry about money like anyone else would. And of course, Erin, it's not that she doesn't care at all about what other people think, but it's just sort of a natural, those are our leanings. And, but once you've kind of identified that mix and like what you tend to think about and worry about most, basically what we want to do is we want to let these emotions play the role and serve their purpose, but not overstep their bounds. And that goes across the board for all the emotions, right? They all have a role to play. They all have really valuable information to share with us. But we just can't let the emotions overstep their bounds. So like, please, before you make a big leap, pay attention to fear. How are you going to pay for this? Are you going to be, are you going to lose your home because you want to open a popsicle stand or whatever? Like, that's probably not, like, let's do some math. Let's think about this. How many $2 popsicles do you have to sell to, pay the mortgage? Like, think about that. Do that math. Please. There's so much valid information, in that fear, in those questions, and what kind of can be excuses. There's so much worth exploring and worth listening to, but, that fear, those voices will not really ever stop, and they will just tell you to not do anything in most cases. That's what fear does. Fear is there to keep you safe. But if that's the only voice you're listening to, it will not only keep you safe, it will hold you back from so much. So we have to learn to listen to that, listen to the fear, without it completely overstepping and just taking over and sort of driving the vehicle, right? And in the movie Inside Out, they have that like the big console up in headquarters, and like they literally have different emotions at different times hitting the buttons, right? So like fear needs to have a seat at the table, anger needs to have a seat at the table. But I think when fear is the one driving all the time, you're probably just gonna like stay in park, I'm guessing, right? Because that's the safest place, is just to not go anywhere. But that's not where the joy is. That's not where the life is. So that's not where we want to stay. All right, I didn't have a ton of scripting on this, so I hope that made sense. I always after I stop recording, I'm like, I hope I can make that make sense in the edit. But yeah, I hope that made some sense. I hope that was helpful. We'll be back next week for the 12th episode, season finale. I'm excited about it. Hope to talk to you then. Until then, we'll see you next week. Have a good one.